Now, you might think that after generations of slavery, that the Israelites would have embraced this command with open arms, right? A day off every week. Okay, yes, sign me up. That's what I want. But no, what we see instead is that the reality is John Durham, in his commentary on Exodus, he says this, that keeping the Sabbath proved to be the most difficult command to keep. Why? Well, think about it. Okay, when you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to your productivity, when you've internalized the idea that to stop working is to invite disaster into your life, it's not so easy to just suddenly shift gears and now embrace rest. The Israelites had spent generations in Egypt, where their value was measured by what? By the number of bricks that they could produce, right? Where rest was a luxury that they just couldn't afford it. And so the rhythm of constant work, it had become ingrained into their very beings and into who they were as a people. So to suddenly stop, to be told stop working for a whole day, that would have felt not just foreign, but possibly even threatening. And moreover, so they were in this agrarian society of ancient Israel. Taking a day off, it could have real and tangible consequences. Right? Crops don't just stop growing. Animals don't just stop needing care just because it's the Sabbath. There was likely probably a pretty constant temptation to, have this mindset of like, okay, I'm just going to I'll just do this one thing on the Sabbath, which could easily then spiral into ignoring the command altogether. See, we see this play out throughout Israel's history. The prophets, they frequently call out the people for neglecting the Sabbath. In Jeremiah 17, for instance, God warns the people about carrying burdens on the Sabbath day. See, this wasn't just about physical burdens, but about continuing the work of things like buying and selling and of maintaining the rhythms of everyday life instead of setting aside a day for rest and worship. And then in Nehemiah chapter 13, we see Nehemiah rebuking the people for buying and selling on the Sabbath. I mean, he even goes as far as to order the gates of Jerusalem closed on the Sabbath to prevent traders from entering the city. I mean, this shows how deeply ingrained the habit of constant work had become, that such drastic measures were needed to enforce rest. But this struggle isn't just ancient history. I mean, we face the same challenges today, don't we? We live in a culture that's always on, right? A world that never stops. Our phones ping 24/7 with notifications. Our email inbox is always filling up. I mean, I've seen people's inboxes that notification on there will say like 6,400 something, probably way higher for a lot of people, but the anxiety that gives me, I can't even begin to tell you. But basically, it's this life and this culture of there's always one more thing to do, one more task to complete. In many ways, I would argue that our situation might even be more tough than that of the ancient Israelites, right? They at least had the natural rhythms of day and night, of seasons, to remind them the need for rest. We, on the other hand, live in a world of artificial light and climate control, where we can work around the clock if we choose to, and many do, right? The global nature of our economy means that somewhere, someone is always working. And the pressure to just keep up, to stay competitive, it can be just overwhelming. And we're bombarded with messages telling us that success comes from hustle and grinding, from outworking everyone else. I mean, how many ads do we see right here on YouTube that starts with some guy telling you that you just need to grind, you just need to hustle, this is what I do. In this always-on world, the idea of setting aside a whole day for rest can seem not just difficult, but almost irresponsible. Maybe these thoughts creep into our minds of, how can I possibly take a day off? Right? We think there's just so much to do. And maybe we worry that if we stop, even for a day, we're going to fall behind, we'll miss out, or we'll fail. So really, how different are we from the Israelite culture that tied their worth to their production? I mean, we've internalized the exact same message, right? We are what we do. And so the idea of intentionally not doing, of choosing to rest, can feel deeply uncomfortable. we may even feel guilty when we're not being productive, as if rest itself is a form of laziness or selfishness. And at the end of the day, this internalized pressure, it can be especially challenging for those in helping professions, or even those in ministry. And as Christians, we all have our own ministry. And so this can be especially challenging because there's often a sense that taking time for rest means neglecting those who need our help. We can fall into the trap of thinking that our constant availability is our measure of our dedication or our effectiveness. Right? And if you're thinking, which I don't blame you, that's great if you are, but if you're thinking, okay, I have no problem just not doing something. I love just doing nothing. Let me shift perspectives on this then. Let me ask you this. Have you ever tried to use busyness maybe as a way to avoid deeper issues? Because maybe for you it's easier to stay constantly occupied than to slow down and face the questions and fears that might surface in those quiet moments. Maybe you stay busy rather than sit down with your own thoughts. Because busyness can also be a form of escapism, a way to avoid confronting the parts of ourselves or our lives that we're uncomfortable with. Because again, our world is so hyper-connected. We've developed a fear of missing out. There's always another email to check. There's always another social media post to read, another news update to follow. The idea of disconnecting from everything for a day, it can provoke anxiety, right? What if something important happens and we're not aware of it? So what are some of the specific obstacles that keep us from embracing rest right now, today? Put a list together of 8 of them for us. So the first one, number 1, is the pressure of productivity. We live in a culture that values doing over being. Right? We're constantly pushed to achieve more, to produce more, to be more efficient. And this pressure comes not just from external sources, even though it does, but from our own internalized expectations of ourselves. Right? We've bought into the myth that our value is determined by our output. Number 2 is maybe the fear of missing out. In our hyper-connected world, again, there's always something happening. And taking a day to disconnect, it can feel like we're missing out on important information or maybe opportunities that could be coming our way. And maybe we worry that if we're not constantly engaged, we'll fall behind or worse, be left out. And then number 3 is that maybe we have an addiction to busyness. Right? For many of us, busyness has become a habit, right? Almost an addiction. We feel uncomfortable, maybe even anxious when we're not doing something. The constant just stimulation of activity, that's become our norm. And the quiet of rest can feel unsettling. And then number 4 is the confusion of our identity. Because when we have tied our identity and worth to what we do, then not doing can feel like losing ourselves. Right? We might struggle with this question of, who am I if I'm not a pastor? Who am I if I'm not a father? Who am I if I'm not insert your own profession or hobby or activity here. And at the end of the day, when that's the mindset, then true rest can feel not just difficult, but almost threatening to the sense of who we are. And then number 5 is just the neglect of soul care. Because our society, it puts such a focus on physical health and mental well-being, but how often do we neglect the care of our souls, which is what Sabbath rest is all about? Right? We may not know how to engage in activities that nourish our spirits. We may not see the value in taking time for spiritual renewal. And then number 6 is this misconception of what rest actually is. And our culture has such a way of redefining words that we lose what they actually meant to begin with. And so, again, the 6th one, the misconception of rest, is that often we misunderstand what true rest actually is. Right? We might think of rest as merely physical relaxation or maybe just entertainment. That when we do that, though, we're missing the deeper spiritual and emotional renewal that Sabbath rest offers. And this can lead to rest that doesn't actually refresh or renew us at all. Right? It's like when you take a nap, but you wake up and somehow you're more tired than when you first fell asleep. And then number 7 is the tyranny of urgency. Because in our world, with how fast-paced everything is, everything can feel urgent. Right? We can fall into the trap of constantly responding to the immediate at the expense of the important. So taking time for rest, it requires us to take a step back and to reassess our priorities. And then number 8, the last one on this list, is the illusion of indispensability. See, we may believe that things will fall apart if we're not constantly involved. And this can be especially challenging for those in leadership positions. So learning how to delegate and to trust others, that's such an important part of embracing Sabbath rest. And see, these challenges, these 8 challenges, it's not exhaustive, but it's the 8 that I came up with. They're real, right? And they're not easy to overcome either. They're deeply ingrained in our culture and often in our own psyches. But I believe that the Sabbath command, far from being an outdated rule, it offers us a life-giving alternative to the exhausting pace of modern life. The Sabbath, it invites us to step off of the treadmill of just constant productivity, to remember that our worth isn't determined by what we do, but who we are as children of God. It calls us to trust that the world will keep on turning even if we pause for a day. And it offers us the opportunity to realign our priorities, right? To nurture our relationships with God and others, and to find renewal for our souls.